The goal in your life is not to figure out how to be comfortable in your mental prisons, but to realize that you have the keys to set yourself free.
All right, welcome to the program, everybody. It's Tim Shurr, and today I have another mesmerizing guest. I'm really excited about this one. Randy Pennington is here with us. Randy, woo!
Hey, Tim, how are you, sir? Good to be with you as always.
Thank you. Yeah, Randy, I'm so glad you're here. So for our listeners, Randy is a very well-known author and writer. He works for top magazines or not works for them, but publishes for them. They all want his work. They all want his knowledge. Randy has a giant brain, and people are always learning from him. He's written some really powerful books that have been just staples in the business industry for many, many years. One of his best ones is Make Change Work. And we're going to be talking about some of the secrets and ideas from his works and take a couple laps in his head and so that you understand why this guy is so mesmerizing. So I'm really glad that you're here, Randy. So let's jump right in. So you in one of your books, it was called On My Honor, I Will. Ross Perot actually said that he said you cracked the code on what great leadership is all about. So can you tell us a little bit about what you think really makes someone a great leader?
Well, that's a great question. And, we just lost Mr. Perot a few weeks back. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up. I always love to chat about him too. He was a great leader. Excuse me, Tim. But here's what I figured out. Leadership really isn't about position. Leadership is about your ability to influence others. And it's really not any more than that or not any less than that. But when you think about influencing people, we can mandate their compliance. Managers mandate compliance. Sometimes leaders have to as well, but you can always mandate compliance. But the best leaders earn volunteered commitment. And so people give you that little bit extra. And the basis of that, I believe, is trust. They trust your character. They trust your competence. They trust your communication. They trust your consistency. And here's one of the things that we found, Tim, is that trust, everybody says, well, I don't trust you. They think it's a character issue. No, our research actually shows that it's how you communicate. And there's another missing piece of that not many people talk about from a leadership perspective. It's one of the things that made Mr. Perot such a great leader. It's courage. And it's the courage to do the right thing, especially when it's not convenient.
Well said. Yeah. And a lot of times the right thing isn't convenient. I mean, it's easy when things are going your way and when everybody agrees with you or when the stakeholders are on your side. But when they're not, when they're saying you need to cut a whole bunch of employees and you're saying, no, we need to build, optimize, and expand without having to cause people to lose their income and their job security, then you have to step in and do the right thing. And the people that do that have the courage, they're the ones that earn the trust and get the discretionary effort. So I love it.
Yeah, one of the great stories about Mr. Perot, some of your listeners and viewers may remember that Mr. Perot was the subject, his going to rescue his employees that were in prison in Iran, was the subject of a Ken Follett book called On Wings of Eagles. And, one of the questions I asked Mr. Perot about that, I said, okay, Mr. Perot, why did you go and rescue those employees? The government was telling you not to do it. We'll negotiate it. Why did you go and do that? Why did you stage that? And he said, well, it's a great question. And then he said, I was sitting in the hospital room. My mother was in the hospital for cancer. And I was sitting in the hospital room when this was going on, visiting with her. And my mom said to me, Ross, those people aren't there because they chose to be there. You put them there. They're your responsibility. You should go get them. And he
Wow.
said, so I guess I staged this entire operation just because my mother told me to.
You'll always find a powerful, amazing woman behind any great man.
Well, and Mr. Perot talked a lot about, that courage to do the right thing. And in the book, in the book Wings of Eagles, it talks about what they called the dirty dozen that went over to stage this attack. Here's the other thing that becomes a real testament to that courage of doing the right thing. They had 235 or so employees of EDS at the time. That's the company he was president, CEO of. 235 employees volunteer for that assignment, and they chose the top 15 out of that 235. But 235 people chose to go put their life on the lines, in some cases for people they didn't even know, hadn't met, but they knew they were part of the family. And they did it because the leader they trusted said, this is the right thing to do.
Wow, that gives me chills. Yeah, it's when you're a part of something that you believe in, and we want to feel like we're a part of that, right? It's one of our strongest human needs is that love and connection. And Napoleon Bonaparte once said, it's amazing how grown men will die for ribbons, right? But it wasn't the ribbons.
Right, right. Yeah, it's amazing what a man will do for a piece of colored ribbon. Exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. And so I love your ability to tell stories. As soon as you start talking, Randy, I go into this trance and I'm like, wow, I'm just so into the story, then listen into what you're saying that I even forget that I'm here with the studio or microphone and so that's really cool. And so what has to happen inside of somebody in order to get past that resistance, that fear of what others are going to think, or the fear of losing their job, their position, money? What has to happen inside of somebody to get past that, to be able to have the courage to do the right thing?
Well, that's another great question, I go back, you talked about relationships and feeling part of things is a big part of it. I have a firm belief that Maslow was right. Now, I don't know if you ever took psychology in school, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The very first one was safety and security.
Yes.
And, if you think back about what Maslow said, and it built on up to self-actualization, if you think about what Maslow said, Tim, he basically said, unless I have a roof over my head and food in my stomach, and I'm safe and secure, I don't give a rip whether you like me or not. and if you think about it from that perspective. So here's the thing that I tell people is it's much easier to make that decision when you've covered the bases.
Yeah.
And so I realized then that, here's the dilemma. So if you had Ross Perot's money, he was a billionaire, well, it's easy to make that decision if you're Ross Perot. I read somewhere recently that in some of the research that I'm doing, Warren Buffett spends 80% of his time reading and thinking about the future, which is courageous and the right thing to do. And everybody goes, well, of course he does. He's Warren Buffett, right? Who's going to tell him he can't? But see, I think when you talk to those people, when you talk to Mr. Perot, you talk to the Mr. Buffetts of the world, what they'll tell you is that taking that action was what allowed them to get where they were, to having that courage. So if you ask Mr. Buffett, why do you spend it's easy for you to spend 80% of your time. You're Warren Buffett. And he would go, how do you think I got to be Warren Buffett?
Yeah.
If you think about Mr. Perot and you said, well, gee, it's easy for you to decide to go do this, Mr. Perot. You're a billionaire. He would go, how do you think I got to be a billionaire?
Mm-hmm.
And so, there is a tendency. And so there's a sense that you have to step out and trust doing what's right. Now, I'm also a firm believer that sometimes you need to be judicious about it. If I have a family with 3 children and I'm not going to have health insurance for 2 years, and I may have to, I've got to figure that stuff out, but that's all timing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about if, it's about when at that point. And so if you keep the focus on this is the thing to do, and then there's always a risk, but part of leadership is understanding the risk, mitigating that risk where you can, and then being resilient around things that go wrong just because they're not expected. So, I mean, I think there's a combination of things. There's a piece of courage in there. One of the things I've written about Tim is I think we all should have, and I think companies should have, a case of positive, productive paranoia. Now, and I go back to that. There was a quote from the great Herb Kelleher, who was founder and former CEO of Southwest Airlines. Herb once said, "I famously predicted 11 of the last 3 recessions." And so what he was really talking about, Tim, was this thing of you have to have your antenna up always. And that's what helps you mitigate that risk and avoid that risk. So, I mean, I think it's just a matter of courage. You know, I don't remember the quote, but I keep going back to it. At the end of your life, more people will be concerned about the things that they didn't do than the ones that they did. They will regret the ones that they didn't do. And, you know, I think that there's got to be just a sense of courage around that, but it can't be blind. It's got to be also partnered with reality and a commitment to execution.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love it, Randy. So have your head in clouds, but keep your feet on the ground. And, you know, when you're moving through, remembering that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And so that's really good. You know, a lot of times people will think that, well, when I have this or when I have that, then I'll show up and be this way, right? So when I have more money, then I'll be more generous and give. No, you probably won't. You know, if you have $10 in your wallet and you're not willing to give $1 of it away, then when you have 100,000 or 100 million, you're probably not going to feel like you can give away, you know, 10% of that either. And so, you know, deciding who you want to be and being more committed to the person that you want to be and the values that you have than the fear and the what ifs is what allows you to be able to take a bold action, smart, calculated, but take bold action. And that is what pays off. And that's what causes others to say, wow, I want to follow you.
Yeah. You know, and you mentioned that, you know, my dad was a diesel truck mechanic. Mm-hmm. He had a real job all of his life, unlike what I get to do for a living. And, you know, one of the things that I always remember about my father was his generosity. And, you know, there were times, truthfully, that a good year for him was a good month for me. And yet he was one of the most generous people. I can't tell you the number of times that I would see some guy that worked for him, and he ran a shop, and he had some guys that worked for him and some drivers of trucks that worked for him and what have you. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you the number of times I saw him go out on the front porch. Somebody would come up, knock on our door, would come up, and he would reach in his wallet and pull out a 20 and give it to them to get them through to the next paycheck.
Yeah.
And, you know, and he just did it. And, you know, and this was not a guy that made just a ton of money. I mean, he would have found a use for that $20. But he knew that from a leadership perspective and the person that he wanted to become and show an example of, that act of generosity, of caring about people, of influencing people through what he did and how he acted more than what he said, that was the best thing that he could do.
That's a beautiful story. So that's amazing that you had your dad give you that example of leadership. That's amazing. So I'm sure you have lots of references and stories about things that you've seen from your dad that influenced you. How did you become someone who is so well respected now on teaching leadership and how to do the right thing? How did you get to where you are? I'm sure there's a series of of things, but
you know, the honest answer is I have no clue. But let me tell you how it started.
Okay.
Let me because I think everyone that goes into this business, Tim, they have someone that they looked up and they said, I want to do that. I want to be that. I think I could do that. You know, I had people say it's Jim Rohn or it's Zig Ziglar or it's, yeah, for me, it was Tom Peters.
Sure.
That wrote the book. And I read the book In Search of Excellence. And so let me kind of go back, and a lot of things that I have done in my life led me to this point. One is I've been sort of an organizational and leadership geek forever. You know, I have my graduate degrees in psychology, but I was much more, and I worked in the psychiatric system for 9 years.
Yeah.
But I was much more interested in how organizations work than just dealing with the individuals. And so I got interested in that really very early on in my career. I had good bosses. I had bad bosses. I thought, well, that's interesting. What's the difference? And then I started thinking about it from a human behavior standpoint. So I got really interested in that. And then I was a hospital administrator for about 5 years. I did a startup operation where I was one of 3 senior people that opened the first state-supported residential treatment facility for children and adolescents in the state of Texas.
Nice.
So we did a startup. And so so we started thinking about leadership and culture from day one. Back when no one was talking about it, we were saying, what is it that we want to create? We weren't calling it corporate culture, but it was like, who are we? What do we stand for? How do we influence people? So, you know, I had that interest. I was also very fortunate that I've been, you know, being out there has never been a problem with me. I started playing in bands when I was 12. I spent a summer playing guitar in a band for Six Flags Over Texas. I spent my college years playing with in a duo. We played probably 3 weekends out of every month somewhere.
Wow.
So, I mean, I was used to being out in front of people. So then I was able to marry my love of organizations with my experience, and I liked doing that too, but you know, everybody thinks they're going to be a rock star. They're not. So I became pretty clear that was not going to happen for me. So but I found out that I was pretty good at this. And then I got recruited by a consulting firm and had much more experience. We were working in organizational culture and leadership and supervision. And then from there, it grew. I started writing. Interestingly enough, I go back to my high school. You know, we all take those little assessments in high school about what are you going to be good at.
Yeah.
Mine in the 10th grade said I would probably be a good journalist.
Huh. That's
so I've always had that sort of writing ability. I worked when I was in high school. I covered sports for the local newspaper. Mm-hmm. So I was used to writing. And so, you know, I'm interested in this. I'm pretty good at this. And I'm pretty good at that, and you jumble them all together, and then you don't give up, and that's how you end up there.
Yeah, wow, that's really good. Well, you became a rock star for like the Huffington Post. I know that, you know, we're talking off camera how you know, they wanted you so much that you wouldn't be able to do anything else, and so you know.
Yeah, I wrote for HuffPost for 2 years as part of their contributor program. And that was at a time when they actually they approved contributors.
Right.
Over 2 years, I did 104 stories or something, 104
Wow.
pieces for them over 2 years. That they changed the way they operate. It didn't really fit for how I wanted to do things. And so now I picked up other things, and it's given me the chance to write for Fast Company and Entrepreneur and some of those other things that I do.
Yeah, outstanding. You know, I love your background. We have some similarities in that, although I don't know how to play the guitar. but I did work a lot in inpatient, outpatient programs. I worked with kids that were in gangs, kids that were kicked out of school, and in other new programs, right? And so, but I remember when I worked in the inpatient hospital, I always felt like the staff was worse than the kids that were in there. And the higher up you went on the food chain, it was like the more dysfunctional they were. So you'd have someone that was, you know, in charge, and she was so dysfunctional, and it was like unbelievable. And I never really put it together until I was listening to you, that my desire to want to go in and build teams who are more respectful, who know how to communicate more effectively and collaborate better. I think that had an early influence for me as well, just seeing the level of dysfunction with the people who are supposed to be in charge. And
well, and you're exactly right. We all have experiences with bad bosses and bad leaders. And unless we teach ourselves new ways of doing things, we tend to emulate things that we saw other people do. And as you were talking about that, I think back on that environment because, when I finished my bachelor's degree and I started my master's degree, I spent 2.5 years playing volleyball with schizophrenics for a living. That was my job. I ran a recreation program in a 850 bed psych hospital. And we had an aquatic program and a recreation league and a reality orientation stuff. And I go back to think about, some of the nurses, some of the docs, some of the whatever that are there. They started off as highly loving, caring people. I mean, you don't get into that job going, I hate people, so let me go help these folks. So then you go back to what happens. Well, the environment is highly stressful, as you know.
Yeah.
The bureaucracy just sort of at some point beats you down. It's one of the reasons why I ended up leaving, is because I was always the person that assumed it was easier to ask forgiveness, beg forgiveness than ask permission. And that later in my career sort of painted me with a reputation that was not going to allow me to go to expand a whole lot more. But I mean, you get the environment that's highly regulated. You get a very difficult day at work. I mean, the people that you deal with, you have to laugh. People go, well, you all are so callous about it. No, you have to laugh because that's the only way you keep your sanity.
True. Yeah.
And your own sanity. And then,
right.
So you get all those things together. Now you add that over time, that it's 10, 15, 20 years of that.
Yeah.
And you begin to realize that the environment, starts to mold you and shape you. And so if there's not a conscious culture that keeps people revived and refreshed and refocused, then you can't not have a culture. But if you don't make it a conscious one, if you don't fight in that environment for a conscious culture that's positive, then it's easy to succumb to all the negative influences. By the way, I think that pretty much describes almost every job in corporate America that I deal with today.
Wow.
Is that it's a difficult job. There's high demand. There's high stress. There's a great deal of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
The culture becomes toxic. People become burned out. People stop growing and learning, and they forget why we stop getting excited about the work.
Yeah.
And that's what causes disengagement in organizations.
I love how you phrase that. That's really great. That's it makes so much sense because if you're not purposely creating a culture, you're going to have one. It's just not the one you want. And so, but I never quite thought of it in that way. So that's pretty deep. I'm picking up what you're laying down, Randy.
Well, I'm hoping it makes sense, Tim.
Oh, it is. It's really good. You're so articulate in how you phrase things, because I just love that. You're right. After a while, if you're not growing, if you're not learning, if you're not bringing new energy in, then you get used to it. And a lot of organizations are, still stuck in the we've always done it this way. Right. And in fact, there's a whole new, I don't know what you call it, but a whole new opening for trainers who are going in, helping people to manage the digitalization process, which just means we're not going to write things down. We're going to type it into a computer program now. And people are scared that they're going to lose their jobs, that some 18-year-old is going to take their place, which isn't the case. So,
well, I mean, let's, because I deal a lot, and I've written a lot about digital transformation. If you go back and read a lot of the stuff that I've written about, especially for CIO magazine and for Huffington Post, I write a lot about digital transformation. Mm-hmm. The fact is, some people are going to lose their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Some people have always lost their job. And so here's the worst thing we can do as humans is we can sit there and go, well, I don't like this because I'm going to lose your job. I don't like this change because it's going to affect me. Yeah, the change doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be willing to bet that back in the old Wild West days, there were these Pony Express riders that would sit around in the bar after they finished a long day of riding and go, that telegraph, I think that's not a good thing. Well, technology always disrupts some jobs and it creates new jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a human level, if we don't decide to become curious and embrace constantly how we create value, then we're probably going to be disrupted at some point, just like companies are. We're going to lose jobs. I have this client of mine that I work with. I'm not going to tell you their name because this is not a great story, but I'm supposed to be out there in 2 weeks, and they called me up yesterday and said, can we delay by a couple of weeks because we're having to lay off people. We're having to lay off 30 people. By the way, their business is really good right now. But they're having to lay off 30 people. And it's because their labor costs are out of whack with what they need to be to get as a company. And I know for a fact that the CEO has spent the last year asking people to organically reduce their costs. Say, look, in a year, we've got to get from here to here. And he told people and he told people and he told people, he brought me in and I told people, we got to get from here to here. Here's the plan. And they didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at that as a leadership fault. Two things happen. One is leaders didn't talk to employees about creating value.
Mm-hmm.
And two, leadership didn't have the courage to do those things. There's that word again, the courage to take on that. And so now it's out of their hands. It's not a huge layoff. It's only 30 people out of 1,800. But for those 30 people, that's real. And it could have been avoided if they had taken responsibility for their own career. And more important, the leader in that organization had been straight with them about, we have to get to here. How do we do that?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, you're right. By the way, digital is just the tool.
Right. Yeah.
Transformation is the goal.
Nice. Oh, there's a tweet. That's really good. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, human beings are like in anything in nature. If you're not growing, you're dying. And
absolutely,
it's going to change. Yeah. And if you don't change, the change is going to change things anyway. And so you always have to be moving with it. And if you're not looking at ways to improve, grow, be more innovative, then it's going to pass you up and you're going to find yourself, out of the loop or out of the job. I really like how you went back and made the leaders accountable, because it's very easy to jump to a conclusion that the employees were just being lazy or they didn't care or they didn't want this. But, you, just like me, were always taking a look at leaderships and saying, hey, how can we have been more accountable here? What could we have done to make sure that we take people through this process? Because just like an example would be a performance review or setting goals, right? I'm going to meet with you in the beginning of the year. I'm going to meet with you at the beginning of next year, and we're going to see if you were able to achieve your goals or not. Where the best leaders are with you throughout the year, helping, supporting, coaching, giving feedback, all that good stuff. So I like how you took it back to leadership.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about, and when you think about performance reviews or measures, there's two ways that we can use this stuff. There's two ways we can use the numbers. We can use them as a report card, which is what you described. First of the year, here's the goal. Here's what you have to do to get an A. End of the year, did you get an A or not?
Mm-hmm.
That's a report card. There's nothing you can do at that point in time. And we go back to when you got your report card in school. Once your teacher gave you a C, unless there was, like, you had some great photos of your teacher after hours or something, there's very little you could do to change your grade. On the other hand, so that's using metrics as a report card.
Mm-hmm.
The best leaders use metrics as a guide to train, to improve and transform and change behavior and performance. They go in with the standpoint of, Tim, I want you to make an A. My goal is for you to make an A. And because I want so badly for you to make an A as from a leadership standpoint, I'm going to tell you at the first of the year, this is what you have to do to get an A. And then every time, every week, every month, we're going to check in on a really regular basis to see what progress you're doing so that we can calibrate that.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you feedback when I see you do it right. And when I see you do it wrong every single day, I'm going to give you feedback because my goal is for you to make an A.
Yeah.
And see, that's how you start to use numbers as a tool to grow performance rather than give people a report card.
That's so well said. That's how you correctly use KPIs, right? So
absolutely.
So that's just really outstanding. KPIs, if you don't know, listening, key performance indicators, is just the data metrics to let you know where you're at. And so using that to be able to coach people every day. And then just for our listeners, how many of you have that experience where you have somebody in your corner helping you out every day? Most people are like, nope, right? Even when I'm talking, I'll say, how many of you will feel, like people are regularly giving you their full attention even, and just fully being present with you? Raise your hand if you have that experience. And most people are just kind of laughing and looking around like, no, that doesn't happen either. So the best leaders are the ones, according to your books, like Make Change Work, are the ones who are in the trenches every day, that are giving consistent feedback on a regular basis, and that are really invested in helping you. We're going to get this A together, not just go get this A if you want to keep your job.
Well, and by the way, this works for individuals too.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals ought to have key performance indicators.
Mm.
In essence, we do. You step on a scale every morning or on a regular basis. Okay, that's a key performance indicator.
It is. I haven't looked at it that way before, but it is, because how do you keep yourself accountable? How do you know where you're really at?
That's right. So the numbers keep you accountable. Now, and by the way, it doesn't matter if we're talking about organizations or individuals. There's only three things that we can measure: activities, results, and perceptions. That's it. It's all we can measure: activities, results, and perceptions. Now, here's the thing. Most of us wait for results or perceptions. Do I feel like it was a good program? Did we, at the end of the year, how did we do? The thing is, results and perceptions are lagging indicators. They're lagging measures. Activities are leading measures. Now, you can do this with your company, but we can do this with our lives. So let's say that you establish that your ideal weight is 170 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And that you're 10 pounds off of that ideal weight. Do you wait and you say, and I want to be in my ideal weight in 60 days. Okay, 10 pounds, 60 days. If you wait till 60 days to measure where you are, what's likely going to happen?
It ain't going to happen.
Right. So every day you measure, did I work out 30 minutes? Did I work out a minimum of 30 minutes every day? Did I control my calorie intake? Did I do all those things? Because I know the A is 170 pounds and the time frame is 60 days. Now, companies, that's really all goal setting is for a company too.
Mm-hmm.
But then you measure the activities and you track the activities, because if you're focused on the right activities and you do those consistently, you'll eventually get the result that you want.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. So, it's interesting. Perceptions, for me could be a leading measure in a certain way, because it's often our perceptions that are keeping us from taking action, or from taking action in a way that can be empowering. So some people will get on that scale, see a number that they don't like, and suddenly lose all their motivation for the day. And so, taking a look at our perceptions and trying to figure out what we can do to improve our beliefs about that is often what will cause us to put what we know into action.
But by the way, and here's where I would qualify that a little bit.
Okay.
That perception is driven by what you didn't do yesterday.
Okay. Elaborate a little bit.
All right. So if I get on the scale and I'm not where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
Why? Well, there's a couple of things. One is it just takes longer than I had unrealistic expectations. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, people do. People think change ought to be easy and it ought to occur overnight. Doesn't matter. We're talking about individuals or organizations.
Right.
But yeah. But if change were easy and could happen overnight, we would all wake up tomorrow with something decidedly different about ourselves.
Mm.
So one of the things is that unrealistic expectations. So unrealistic expectations could be creating and influencing your perception. Mm-hmm. And so but that was an expectation, not that you had, that was an expectation you had days ago. That expectation formed earlier on. Well,
right.
There was an expectation. I should be able to do this in 2 days.
Right.
That was an expectation. That perception is based upon a faulty expectation in the past.
So when you recognize that, so let's say you recognize that was a faulty expectation, and now you're 2 days later down the road, to think that you should just have that expectation again is a little crazy, right?
What's the definition of insanity? Doing what you've always done and expecting to get different results, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other reason you're not where you want to be is because you didn't do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait a minute! I didn't do the work for I didn't do any exercise for the last week, and I eat cheesecake at every meal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So your perception is wrong, but your perception is based on stuff you didn't do in the past. And so here's the thinking change that has to occur is, and I'm going to frame it up in a kind of a saying, but in a meme, I guess, if you would, but there's a lot to that, is the present should be guided more by the future than the past.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant.
Now, most of us don't do that, including me.
Yeah.
You teach what you need to learn. But, when you think about that, Tim, we should, so if my perception is I can't today, that perception is driven by the past and your experience in the past.
Yeah.
Now, you can't ignore the past, but you can't let it shackle you to it either.
Right.
There's a reason, as the saying goes, there's a reason that the windshield of your car is larger than the rearview mirror.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got to recognize that, but you've got to stay focused on where you're headed.
Absolutely. A fixed mindset, as they say, is when you constantly compare the present to the past. And a growth mindset is when you're constantly comparing the future, where you want to be, to where you are right now, so that you can keep moving forward. And there's so many examples of how people will get stuck if they're constantly looking at their past. Learn from it, move forward, but don't get stuck in it. And so, and then
by the way, organizations do the same thing.
Oh yeah. Human beings, individuals, organizations, we all do the same thing, right? We just do it in larger quantities. So, but you can't escape the human mind, human perceptions, and these unconscious biases that we have, because we just bring them to work with us. Right. And so, I always say when I'm coaching a high power executive, we spend a lot of time talking about their marriage and talking about their relationship with their kids. And then that helps to improve how they show up in the workplace. So that's very powerful stuff. You dropped a lot of really good insights. And I think that's why people get stuck so many times, is because they're focusing on what hasn't worked. And they think that, if it is hard, that maybe they're doing it wrong, or there's something wrong with them, which is false. The reason it's hard is because it forces you to grow into the person that you need to become in order to have sustainable results.
Yeah. I mean, if this was easy, everybody would do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Maybe.
yeah, I mean, if it was, I tell people all the time, this is easy. I would have to have a real job. It's hard. Change, whether you're talking about an organization or individuals, change is just hard to do because we, especially as adults, we get into our comfortable habits. And those comfortable habits, and by the way, we learned that, children, it's always amazing. There's a point, and the research says it's sometime around, 12, 13 years old or so, where kids go from being innately curious about everything to relying on what worked in the past to guide what they do today.
Mm-hmm.
It's when habits form. Now, when you're 2 years old, you don't have a lot of habits, so you're always learning, you're always curious and what have you. Yeah. Adults lose that. Adults look at things by, well, it worked in the past, that's what we do today. Mm-hmm. And the proof is, if your desktop computer goes down and you fiddle with it until it comes back up and it goes back down again, the first thing you try is the last thing you tried the previous time.
Yeah.
That's the way we always do it. And so the challenge today is basically past success proves that you were right once.
Mm-hmm.
Things are changing so quickly in the environment and with the technology and with the tools that are available to us that there's no guarantee that what you did in the past will continue to work. Mm-hmm. That's why companies get disrupted.
Yeah. What got you here won't get you there, right?
Right. I mean, when you think about it, Sears should have been Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
1901, when Sears was founded, the mail was the internet.
Mm-hmm.
They owned the mail. They should have owned the internet, but they didn't.
Yeah.
Because they were thinking, well, we got this mail thing and it's working just fine. We got these stores and it's working just fine.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. That's why the best leaders that I see are usually the visionaries. They're like, we're doing well, but there's a reckoning coming. So we always got to keep, constant and never ending improvement, try to figure out what we can do to add more value. Because if we just stay the same, that line's always changing. It's always moving. And if we move with it and we stay ahead of it, we're going to be okay. But if we stop, that line's going to pass us by.
I don't know if you saw this, Tim. Did you see the article? There was a piece out that Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, mm-hmm. stood up in front of all of his employee meeting and said, I see a time when Amazon is no longer relevant in the marketplace.
Wow. Yeah. Very insightful.
Wow. Yeah. And so if Bezos is thinking that.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, so kind of what you said in the very beginning of our talk, where you said that I'm Warren Buffett or Warren Buffett, or I'm Ross Perot because of how I approach things, because I'm always looking to the future, because I'm always learning and growing, because I'm always asking questions. That's what's allowed me to be who I am. It's not the other way around. And now you just gave another great example of that with, the CEO of Amazon saying we might not be relevant, down the road. And he's asking that question because he's thinking, well, what would we have to do in order to stay that way? Or what would happen next, right? So he's already thinking beyond. And instead of just thinking we're unbeatable, which is the best way to get knocked down.
Right. So by the way, I want to give your viewers and listeners a way to think about this. Now, if you look at the amount of gray hair that I have in my hair and my beard, it's obviously I'm not a young guy. But there was a TV show, you probably don't remember it. There was a TV show on when I was a kid called Wagon Train.
Oh yeah, sure.
Wagon Train starred Ward Bond. And by the way, that show would never get made today because it was about what you would expect. It was a wagon train going across the prairie. So the job of the wagon master, which was Ward Bond's character, is to get the train from point A to point B. We're going 10 miles today. It's to get from first step to mile 10 by the end of the day. And there's always stuff that goes on. Wheels fall off, people get in arguments, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But there was a group of people that worked for the wagon train called the Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
And the job of the Scout is to ride out over the horizon. Not at the horizon. You can see what's at the horizon and closer to you. Ride out over the horizon. And every day they rode out over the horizon, they looked for two things. Where's the water? Where are the hostiles?
Huh.
Where's the water? Where's the next opportunity? Where are the hostiles? Where's something that could derail us? And, one of the things that I would suggest for every business leader, for every individual, is that there's got to be a piece of your day, your week, your month, whatever works, but that you've got to be out riding out over the horizon to look at where the waters and where the hostiles.
That's really good. That's really good, because people typically will do one or the other. So people will take a look and where's the hostiles, right? Where am I going to get hurt? And they're constantly focusing on what could go wrong, which isn't always an empowerment strategy. It often just keeps people stuck in stress and fear. Or they're always looking for how can I grow, and they're not watching their back. They're not looking at any weaknesses. They're not looking for how they're, I remember back in the day when I was, running one of my practices, I had all my money in newspapers. So I was doing full page ads and all this advertising. And then all of a sudden the newspaper started tanking, and then so did my practice, because I had all my eggs in one basket and I wasn't thinking maybe I should diversify. Right.
Well, yeah. And, and there are some organizations that apparently don't focus on either. They just continue to do what they do today. Mm-hmm. Why didn't a taxi company invent the Uber app?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or the rideshare app?
Yeah.
Why didn't that happen? Why didn't the Postal Service say, okay, we're not in the business of delivering letters and packages. We're in the business of connecting people through messages. What if the Postal Service had invented email?
Mm-hmm.
And so, instead they just said, no, we deliver letters. Yeah, but what happens if nobody's sending letters anymore? So, I think that you're right. As an individual, we have to do both. When you look at the change that's coming in the workplace today, by the way, all this stuff about artificial intelligence and driverless vehicles and 5G technology, it's real.
Yeah.
This is not, it seems like science fiction. It's real. It's going to happen. And it may not happen. It's not going to happen tomorrow, may not happen in 2 years, but chances are for every one of us, there's going to be part of it that's in our lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything that was on Star Trek is just like showing up.
Oh yeah.
Right. It's just, and of course, what's available, the general public doesn't even know what we have, the technology that's exists that we're not even aware of, right? The general public doesn't even know. And so, yeah, you're 100% right. And I think that anybody that's in a leadership position, we're all leaders of ourselves, but anybody that's listening to this, that's in a leader of a company, a group, an organization, Randy just gave you two very powerful, ideas. Asking yourself, what is your mission all about? It's not just sending letters, it's connecting people. So figuring out what your real purpose is. And then the other question was, what if they don't need that anymore? What are you going to do instead? What's your backup plan? How do you pivot? How do you adjust? And asking those questions are so powerful, because it's one of the ways that you can uncover what your blind spots are, so that you can make enhancements, so that you don't need a big, to get leveled or have a big correction, in order to learn from it. We don't always have to learn from our pain. We can also learn by being proactive. So those are brilliant questions, Randy.
Great.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I know we're almost out of time here. From all the things that you've learned, because you have such a wealth of experience, and it's obvious the knowledge you've acquired over the years, if you could take that and go back and tell little Randy, when you're a little boy and give him a little bit of advice or a nugget of wisdom based on what you've learned so far, what advice would you go back and tell your younger you?
I would probably tell myself, it's a great question. I have to think about that one for a second. I'd probably tell myself a couple of things. One is you should be more aware of what's coming in the future. You know, when I took my first computer class, it was like, okay, well, this is fun, but it's no, I should have been more aware. I might have made different choices. So you should be more aware of what's coming in the future. The second thing that I would tell myself, though, is to strike a really strong balance between mastery and curiosity. Mastery means, to master something, we have to be totally focused, and it's the repetition that creates the mastery. The curiosity, though, is what allows that mastery to grow and evolve and be aware of what's next. I don't know if you've ever read about, it's called the theory of the adjacent possible.
No.
All right, so the theory of the adjacent possible says this, is that there are things that you might do in the future that you can't do until something else happens first, adjacent to it. So if you think about it from a technology standpoint today, autonomous vehicles are going to happen, but it won't happen before 5G technology and the network. So the adjacent possible, autonomous vehicles won't really be possible in widespread use until adjacent network happens first. All right, so from a mastery standpoint, you're focused on right now, but the curiosity is what allows you to continue that adjacent possible. If you go back to, where you spend time on innovation today, it used to be that you spent time, 70% of your improvement focused on what you're doing right now, 20% focused on, sort of what's the next logical iteration, 10% focused on what's really out there. I would be more focused on what's really out there. It's not probably 10% of your focus. It probably is 25, 30% of your focus, maybe more, because it's those 20% of what's possible activities that are really going to give you your big payoff later on.
That's such a good rule of thumb anyway, right? The 80-20. So if you are focusing on that possibility and what's out there, and it's also a cool way of collaborating, right? This is what
Absolutely.
I need in order to be able to pull this off. Who's doing that?
Yeah, it happens. If you're thinking ahead, for example, if you knew what you knew today, would you have bought Starbucks stock on the very first day that it opened?
Yes.
Would you have bought Amazon stock on the very first day that it opened?
Absolutely.
Yes. I live in Dallas, Texas. Dallas is growing like crazy. When I first moved to Dallas, my wife and I would drive out in this area and there would be nothing out there. And we'd see this sign up there, today that property is worth $20 million,
Wow.
And you could have bought it for $100 an acre back then.
Yeah.
And so if you thought about the future, would you have figured out a way to buy that 20 acres of land?
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's putting yourself in the frame of mind that says, what's my time horizon? Where am I headed? How's this going to fit in? And then moving in that direction.
And that is how you make change work. So
absolutely.
Outstanding. So Randy, now I know people can find your work and your books on Amazon. And so I'll make sure and have the links in the show notes. How else can people follow you or get in touch with what you're doing and connect with you?
Well, thanks for asking. The website is Pennington Group, all one word.com, penningtongroup.com. You can find out information there. Stay tuned. We're talking very seriously. Probably in the fall, we're going to announce a YouTube channel update where we're going to be doing more on a regular basis that way. I'm on pretty much all social media. You can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of stuff too. So, if you type in Randy Pennington, you want to see the stuff I've written for Huffington Post, type in Randy Pennington, Huffington Post. You want to see the stuff I wrote for CIO, type in CIO. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.
And I highly recommend that everybody does that, because I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You've really caused me to think and grow, which is, I love. That's my favorite thing. A lot of times people will say the same things over and over, but you've got some very thought-provoking questions that you ask, which really shows the mastery that you have. And yet at the same time, you'll be the first one to say, yeah, but I'm always learning, because masters always will tell you that, I don't know anything. The true ones will.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment, because like I said, most days I'm just like everybody else. I'm trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah. Well, what's next? That's right. And what you want to be next, right? So that we're being active. So thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all of this wisdom. I can't wait to go back and re-listen to it again. And so thanks so much for being on this program and for absolutely being mesmerizing today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. And for everybody that's listening, wow, that was awesome, right? And so I want you to make sure that you are going back and listening to this episode again and taking notes and writing down those questions that Randy shared with you, because they will help you to be prepared for what's coming next. And who knows, you might be the next Amazon with these questions that Randy's given you. Make sure you follow up with him on his social media, and I'll put all his links for where you can find his book and everything in our show notes, so check that out. Share this with your friends, share this with your fellow leaders and people who are in positions where they can actually take what Randy shared and put it into action, and it'll make you, your company, and your whole life a mesmerizing, sure success. So thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Hey, would you like more free tips on how to be a mesmerizing leader? Then check out mesmerizingleadership.com, and also hang out with me on Facebook, facebook.com/Tim Shurr. Thanks so much, and make your